Now I'd like to give the floor to Kateryna Narovska. Now, before I do, I can tell you that I am proud of working with Kateryna because Kateryna is president of the National Association of Mediators of Ukraine, formed in 2014 in order to create benchmarks and standards in mediation. The association doesn't train, but they instead unite representatives of various organizations who work together in order to develop standards and policies to develop mediation in Ukraine. And incidentally, this is not like in other countries. What the National Association of Mediators of Ukraine does, it brings closer the organizations involved in mediation to each other, forming this community and networking. So, Ms. Narovska, in addition to being a president of the National Association, she's also a certified mediator, supervisor, trainer, teacher, facilitator, and educator. Thank you, Louisa, for your kind words. And indeed, we've been working effectively together. I am honored to moderate today's panel. Welcome to the third day of our forum. Our panel today is dedicated to mediation for all, how to ensure awareness and access to mediation services for vulnerable groups of the population. We have an hour and 45 minutes to look into this topic. I will moderate this panel. Each presenter has up to 15 minutes to cover the topic. So please stick to the timetable. After that, we'll have some time to take questions. So let me first introduce to you our panelists. And we are flexible, so we might change the order of presenters, but anyway, they will all be speaking to us. Vasyl Lutsyk, head of the National Social Service of Ukraine, PhD, member of Scientific Council of Constitutional Court of Ukraine. Unfortunately, Vasyl Lutsyk is limited in his time, so we'll be flexible about his time. Then I'd like to give the floor to Natalia Korol, Chief of Staff of Vinnytsia Court of Appeals. She is also head and co-founder of NGO All-Ukrainian Association of Court Employees. She holds a Master of Law, PhD. She's a certified mediator. She's also a member of Association of Lawyers of Ukraine. Then we will give the floor to Oleksandr Baranov, who's the director of Coordination Center for Legal Aid in Ukraine. He was appointed as director in 2012. She holds MA of Law and Administration. Then we will give the floor to Mr. Yue-En Chong, who is a certified mediator, accredited with Singapore International Mediation Institute. and he specializes in mediating family and community disputes, and has been a panel mediator at several mediation centers in Singapore, including the SMC, Eagles Mediation and Counseling Centre, Community Mediation Centre, the Singapore Law Society Family Mediation Scheme, and SAGE Mediation Singapore. He's also a lawyer and specializes in family law, psychiatric issues, and he wrote a book and some monographs. And in conclusion, we will give the floor to Andrea O'Neill, President of the Mediators Institute of Ireland, leading an organization that represents 700 mediators across the island of Ireland, and she cooperates with humanitarian organizations. In 2024, Andrea received an award, Global Mediation Synergy Awards, for her contribution to promoting mediation worldwide. She's an accredited mediator. She specializes in mediation at workplace, divorces, and she's also certified in conflict coaching, labor relations, and in addition to her practice, she also teaches at National College in Ireland. So first, we will hear about situation in Ukraine, and then we will be pleased to hear from our foreign guests about situations in their countries. Is Mr. Vasyl Lutsyk here? Has he joined? Yes, he is here. Good. In that case, I'd like to give the floor to him first. Mr. Lutsyk, what challenges do you see today at the National Social Service of Ukraine? Hello, dear colleagues. I'm glad to participate in this event. This is very timely, actually, because this week we presented a strategy of development of social services for the future, and we still need to see how we integrate the service of mediation and how mediation is going to be developed as a social service. When we talk about mediation as a social service, we should probably think about it in the following way. War has created a lot of difficult life circumstances for children. Oftentimes, children end up in institutions, which is against our national policy, and of course it is against the interests of the children. Therefore, mediation is a good tool of returning a child back into the family. Plus, the family can resolve the difficulties and preserve biological family. There are several aspects for us. First, because we coordinate and evaluate the quality of social services throughout the country, our goal is to develop quality assessment criteria for services rendered and to understand the specifics, the specific nature of this service. Because we have a new involved subject, the work is quite hard. How do you evaluate the quality of this work? And what should we should be oriented on towards the result or the process. Therefore, we've been consulting with the Association of Mediators and experts in order to get their feedback and advice on how we can render this service at a higher quality level. The challenges today are mostly about training social workers, because in order to render such service, they need to be well versed in this profession, essentially. The other challenge is that the citizens of Ukraine who might need this service, they are often unaware of the mechanisms of mediation, how they work, etc. Therefore, our goal is to popularize mediation, raise awareness of people about this. The second aspect that I'd like to dwell upon is the work with those families with children who are now outside Ukraine, who are abroad. We often see that these children are taken away from our parents by social services, and we take steps in order to return those children back to Ukraine. And sometimes there are conflicts between parents and the children, or one of the spouses who is prepared to bring up the child or take the child back to Ukraine. So as a social service, we've been only considering mediation within Ukraine. But because of the war, we have also to take into account the fact that currently there are many Ukrainians who are refugees abroad. So therefore, we need to take steps to avoid situations when children end up in institutions abroad. And so we need to coordinate with our colleagues abroad and, of course, focus on interests of the child and do our best in order to return the child back to Ukraine, and we need to do it professionally.
When we're talking in general about the vision for social service delivery for the future, so that we understand how we are going to be integrating this as part of the strategy, we need to be mindful that as of today, social services and their delivery are normally funded by the communities' budgets. But not all the communities prioritize social services. And this leads to the situation that mediation is often overlooked. Not because people don't want it, but because in some of the communities, they do not have infrastructure and proper conditions for their delivery. So we as the state now realize that we need to rechannel funding for social services. Right now, we are organizing some of the pilot projects where we as the state procure those services and pay from the state budget. And according to our strategy, we're going to be developing the different tiers of funding. Something is going to come from the regional budget, something else from the national, and some of those services are going to be paid by local budgets on the ground, community budgets, I mean. Those communities, we want to make sure that those communities are actually provided with social services. And that's why we need to also build awareness about resilience as part of mediation. We have now opened the number of programs, And we opened as well resilience centers locally. And those centers help channel those people and for mediation. I mean, so we can actually cooperate, therefore, on a community basis and disseminate information about those services, including with the support of civil society. So it is also important to make this efficient referral mechanism so that we do not lose those people who need mediation. Anytime they can come to a social service center or resilience center and then get referred to the mediator. And there is another issue which we also take part in. This is restorative justice for young children, for children. So this week has been really busy, actually, because this week we've been talking about mediation for young people in conflict with law. And here, this is one of the areas that we're involved in. We need to deliver those social services for young offenders in terms of their social adaptation. We have not yet seen great progress here. It's not that popular, but most importantly that it just kick-started and we can see some of the results. So I think this is a good case already in terms of creating a proper prevention mechanism so that people do not end up in criminal justice and do not reoffend. I think mediators can help do this job to resolve the conflict and not let it go to the criminal justice system. Okay, this is complicated, this is about something new for us, but unless we do this properly, given the overall situation in the country, and we do not always have the capacity to provide proper services to our citizens everywhere. So what we want to make sure is we do not lose those young people and bring them back to normal life. So dear colleagues, I think first and foremost, the message that I'd like to leave with you, we need to combine different practices with mediation so they are not distorted, because social services, this is a great volume of work for our employees as well as for citizens sometimes. And sometimes, unfortunately, the social services are fragmented. We need to have this holistic approach to understanding mediation so that it is available for all the beneficiaries. And citizens have to understand where mediation can work best for them. We have more than 1,100 service centers. And mediation cannot be used primarily at the premises, but sometimes there are situations when we come across mothers and children and they face problems in their relationship in a family. We can do that, but our employees are trying to audit and take stock of all the services available on the ground. Most people do not even know about mediation that exists and that it could be applied in that particular situation. So this is our job right now, so that we, together with you, could develop clear, simple guidelines and memos for our employees so that they can clearly understand in which situation mediation applies best of all. All in all, the national social policy is now getting transformed. I think you can see that the changes are so vibrant. We have changes virtually every month. And I think as an outcome of this forum, we would appreciate to have your vision and recommendations. Because you are professionals, you are representatives of civil society, please tell us where you can see the place of mediation in the social services realm and across the services that we deliver and try to launch from scratch, because mediation is so integrated, can be so much integrated and universal that it can be used in so many different areas of our life. You can work with institutional care facilities and specifically with children over there. Sometimes they have limited communication with the society. right now we are kickstarting mentoring mechanisms for those children, and the bill already passed the first reading in our parliament. So mediation as a service in building this relationship between children and their families. The families are normally outside institutional care while the children are there. So we need to make sure that there is family-based mediation as well. Sometimes those children are not adapted properly to like normal life. I mean, especially in terms of education after the institutional care. For them, it is very unusual to end up somewhere at a professional school, like a vet school. I think we first need to foster the strategic vision for us to understand how to best place mediation amongst other social services, and we need to take tangible steps for every target population to disseminate information about mediation, to build awareness of it, and use it as much as possible in our relations with citizens whenever they come to us for seeking social support or social services. Thank you so much, Vasyl, for your great intervention, and thank you for sharing a lot of outcomes. It's been really comprehensive, and from what I can hear is that on the one hand, it is really important to make sure social services include mediation as one of the basic services, and it has to be delivered on a community basis. On the other hand, there is also an issue how to fund that properly, because we need to register all the social service providers and those offices that are capable of delivering mediation. Maybe we could also consider mediation services to be delivered abroad for our citizens who had to flee the war. Because social services in those particular cases can be very efficient. I can also hear the need for awareness raising among the population and institutions that can deliver it for both young offenders through resilience centers, through institutional care facilities. We need to build awareness not only about children, among children, but also adults. For that, it requires coordination. Yesterday at the forum, I heard that there are draft resolutions by the cabinet to organize the mediation council. But my question is, what's the role of the public versus the private sector in mediation? You've partly answered this question. You asked for our recommendations, but we would like to hear from you. What are the needs that you have, and what would you recommend for our professional community? Well, first of all, I think the first thing, at least from what we can see as our monitoring findings show, right now we're not doing quality assessment, but considering complaints from citizens, we can definitely tell that the quality is still something that has to be worked on. First of all, mediators, I believe, need to be communicating with our social workers in a more simple and understandable manner. Because mediators normally talk in their professional language, while social workers may not always operate and be aware of those concepts. Probably 1 of the 10 social workers could hear or know something about mediation, but not the other 9. So I need to communicate more. And we need to report positive mediation outcomes as social services, because we are ready, for instance, through our platforms, through our communications channels, to share best practices. Let's do it every week or once every month to demonstrate that mediation really works as social services, because that's what's missing. When I travel across the regions of Ukraine and when I talk to our social workers, they say, we need something simple and explain on simple cases why it is worth going for mediation for a common citizen. This is something we can do without extraordinary resources. And this is going to be a really tangible step forward to build this awareness among social workers and the overall population. So I think these joint events that we've been doing together with Louisa this year, and I mean, they have worked really well. We established very fruitful cooperation with mediators, with the professional community, I mean, and that's so good. We need to continue doing that. So whenever there are any issues, problems, conflicts, we need to keep talking to each other. Mediation is a profession. This is an occupation that is so useful for anyone who works with people. Thank you very much, Vasyl. I can hear the need to report positive cases and best practices. Also, we need to think about confidentiality, but of course, we need to somehow keep this information flowing. Social service is not only about families, this is about adaptation, relations at school, between neighbors, and vulnerable population strata normally have a lot of conflicts in their lives. So they normally go to social services for that, and we need to offer mediation there. So we need to update those materials and deliverables that we have and keep disseminating this information across the board. Because from what I can hear in your presentation, your intervention, building awareness and access, this is not something that is done simultaneously. They need to be done in a holistic and comprehensive manner, and information has to be available on this. I want to thank you very much for your time. I know you are under pressure of your time, so if our audience has one or two questions, no more than two, please. Is there a chance to answer those, Vasyl? Yes, I can see so. So do you guys have any questions, please? I can see none. So I want to thank you very much, Mr. Lutsyk, for your time and for your participation, as well as for your contribution into mediation development. Hopefully, our cooperation will continue. Thank you so much for this great forum, and I want to wish you a very successful continuation of it. Thanks. Let me give the floor to Natalia Korol. She is going to be talking about how to build awareness among vulnerable groups regarding mediation through courts. Please, what's your vision, Natalia? And what's your experience? Good morning, everybody. I'm so glad to welcome everybody here. The previous speaker's words, Mr. Vasyl's words, resonated really well with me, how to not lose those key messages, how to make this human-centric approach, which is now getting quite widespread in the Ukrainian courts, and we're so happy about that. And of course, we need to work in the best interest of the child. That's the second point. That's the principle that is in the foundation of any case pertaining to a young person, whether we're talking about a young person in conflict with law, or this is a victimized child. But again, it reconfirms that we're not accidentally having this panel discussion right now. Of course, referral is important. I'm going to be talking about this as well, because it is through this option as referral, including through the court, these services can be made available through the courts and other institutions. Let me share my screen, and I'm going to share some of my experience in Vinnytsia Court of Appeal. I would just want to make sure that everybody can see my presentation. Yeah, now we can see the slides. Thanks. Brilliant. The issue that I'd like to raise right now, it's basically an idea that I'd like to share with you. It always triggers a lot of discussions, and very often the discussions are so hot. People keep asking whether mediation can be applied in family violence and domestic violence cases, but I'd like to say here, I would take a broader look at this issue. And what I'm trying to say is that we're not talking about conciliation between the offender and the victim, but we're talking about how courts and court staff, with the support of those mediation services that are being established at courts in-house, for those people in conflict with law, how to help them. Because sometimes we come across family violence cases. Primarily those cases are part of the Ukraine's administrative code. We're not talking yet about criminal code, but we need to think how we can help those people and deliver this message that indeed conflict resolution can be handled through mediation. Because you see, this case brought you to the court and it could be handled. It is important to underline that courts, this is just not about judgment, because sometimes we may not know the detail about how those people live after the conflict, after the court decision. There is our law, dedicated law, that gives quite broad discretion to courts in not only preventing family violence, but also in trying to handle those cases. So, as a prevention mechanism, courts have to be engaged very actively to contribute to disseminating information across the society, specifically about those values and valuable principles. And also, we need to refute those negative stereotypes that are sometimes culture-based, and then they affect interaction between people. So we need to make an emphasis that there's always room for conciliation, and family violence can affect people disproportionately, especially the vulnerable ones. I'm so happy that legislatively there is already a definition who the vulnerable persons are, and this is in line with the National Social Services Association, because they've been operating this concept for quite a while. And I think courts have to be aligned with the best social services practices, trying to prevent family violence. Because the clientele, if I can put it that way, who go visit social service centers, very often those are victims. What our service started from, and this is the victim support service in court. It says in-court victim support service. This is how it is called. We kickstarted this project as a pilot project. It all came from an idea to try to help, try to support court visitors, not only in particular categories of cases, but across the board. We were talking initially about a volunteer, we'd been talking about a volunteer project that was successfully implemented in courts. When I'm saying volunteering project, we engaged students to providing support to those people, I mean to the litigants, especially with an emphasis on the victims. And thanks to this project, we managed to establish very good cooperation, and at the end of the day, we signed memoranda of understanding with the first instance courts and law schools, as well as with legal aid centers, to reinforce the project and also boost cooperation between all those entities. Based on this service right now that's been established, we now have an idea about how to pay more attention to the vulnerable categories of people. And that's not accidental. The volunteer-led project, it started from training. It had started from training like everything else that's great normally begins. So in order to apply mediation, one needs to learn it in depth. And under that EU-led private justice project, we had so many different training sessions, activities on how to properly provide support for vulnerable clients in courts, because we realized that this support service is part of the in-house services that courts can deliver. There is the directive on the rights of the vulnerable people. It's not mandatory for Ukraine, but since Ukraine is now pushing forward a lot of integration activities, I mean EU integration activities, I think the directive is going to come into force very soon. There is a new version of it already, and the EU directive emphasizes that one does not have to wait for the rules, for the legislative initiatives or regulatory instruments. One can already help the victims, even at an organizational level.
Nothing special is needed in order to make sure that people feel that justice is done. So we have established good interagency coordination. We are now participating in interagency working groups, and we studied very well the problems of agencies involved in countering domestic violence. And we see that these cases are changing, and it's a stereotype that it only concerns spouses. Today, for example, I looked at the people involved in those cases, and half of those cases, it's often relations between a brother and sister, mother-in-law and son-in-law, mother and daughter, etc. And those are relations that deteriorated as a result of divorce, separating the property of spouses. And all of these are not administrative misdemeanors, but rather civil law cases. Now, what does the service do? We provide support. We send to legal aid centers. Recently, both mother and daughter approached the center. We provide psychological support. We also give information in an easier to understand format. Plus, we also try to orient ourselves on individual needs of people. So these are the options that we use in order to promote mediation. Now, to understand better what results we've achieved over the past 2 years, we always ask a question: what can be done in order to split the flat with ex-spouse? And many people don't know that mediation is actually available and possible, because it's not always a story about defense lawyers, but critically is to remove preconditions for domestic violence, and that's what we're trying to do as part of our work. We are so much involved now in the activities of the service, and we see so much positive results that within the framework of another project supported by EU, and that is model decisions, modern court decisions, we developed a standard procedure which allows for support and informing rather, through volunteer service, integrated reception of courts, as well as support service for victims and witnesses. So we inform participants who visit the court. It's not always a story about positive moments. There are alternatives paths as well. I would like to thank you for your attention, and happy to take your questions now. I would like to thank you for stressing the fact that mediation can also be used as preventive tool. And that's what the law prescribes, by the way. And thank you for your comprehensive attention to the needs of people who are currently vulnerable, need support, and even when they are appointed, when they have appointed service, they can still receive attention and feel that they have access to independence and justice. I can feel that a lot of work has been done, and now I would like to encourage everyone to learn from their experience. You talked a lot about volunteer work and changes in the structure of our institutions, first and foremost, courts in Ukraine. Domestic violence is a highly debatable issue, but we need to remember that people who are vulnerable, they need to talk to someone about their problems, and not only with the antagonist. I would like to leave a little bit more time for questions and answers, but it's important to understand that mediation can not only be used during domestic violence, but people who have suffered, as well as offenders, also need to adapt and get back to normal life. One brief remark. I looked into domestic violence in the context of as a public administrator. And indeed, Istanbul Convention prevents, or rather makes it impossible to make mediation mandatory. However, it doesn't ban the civil cases that are foundation of the negative experience, because systemic domestic violence is more of a criminal case. And I always say that we must always think of clean biography of your children. I can't believe that a father and mother will be pleased to have a criminal case with negative consequences. Thank you. Thank you for sharing the developed mechanisms. We thank Natalia, and today we heard twice already about legal aid. So the next speaker is Oleksandr Baranov. So please, Oleksandr, share your experience of providing access to mediation through legal aid network. I know you've been working quite a lot in this sphere. Thank you, Kateryna. I welcome everyone. Well, the law on mediation was referred to several times today, but I'd like to remind everyone that the law on legal aid envisages providing access to mediation. And it is free of charge. And what we need to understand is that when we talk about primary legal aid, often people think that we only talk about centers of legal aid. However, Article 9 says that such assistance can be rendered by organs of government, local self-government, centers of legal aid, as well as specialized institutions or contract-based private law firms. Since 2011, the access to mediation is to be provided. How access to mediation is done through legal aid system? Well, first and foremost, people come to system with certain legal problems, and when they approach lawyers, the lawyer can identify whether the problem that the person has can be handled through a legal remedy or through mediation. And in such a case, the lawyer can explain. The lawyer can also get in touch with the opposing party, but we need to train our lawyers in order to be able to do this in a qualified manner. We have our in-house instructions and the duty of lawyers to inform their clients about mediation, the tools that they use, the standards of quality have been updated. And of course, we talk about the fact that information on mediation we expand as advertising, really, as promotional materials. We can also involve mediators on a contract basis, and we also work with pro bono conditions. Speaking of popularizing of mediation and raising awareness, it is difficult to do, and not just because of mediation. It's simply because it's human nature. Until the person actually runs into a specific problem and feels it as their reality, normally people ignore information of this sort. When a client comes to legal aid office, we identify the problem. During consultation, we suggest mediation as one of the ways, if applicable, and then we consider how such service could be provided to our clients. So far, it's not in the system. Therefore, we contact mediators who cooperate with us. There is a small circle, small pool of mediators who do take cases like these. Starting from 2019, when renewable justice was introduced, the statistics that we see is we told people, we told through 3,500 individuals about assistance in access to mediation, and 23% cases, and that is 162 clients, decided to go, they chose mediation as a tool, and 11 of them reached an agreement. However, in 2025, the result was already 80% versus 23, and in 73% cases, parties were able to settle conflict through mediation. The parties are interested in results, and this result is fairly open. Their rights are renewed, and generally speaking, can we say that the number of these cases is large? I'd say that still it remains fairly low. Speaking of raising awareness about legal matters, now, when we tell people about alternative ways, and this slide gives you some statistical information. And as of before the war, we had 500 offices, bureaus of legal aid, where rank-and-file citizens can seek assistance. UN has been researching and polling awareness of Ukrainians about their rights. And one of the questions that they ask is, do rank-and-file citizens aware of legal aid available to them? But today it's over 60%, even though from the 60%, not everyone is aware of this. And in fact, most have heard of legal aid, but only 23% actually know how to receive assistance. And this is despite, almost 15 years of active work in this field. So I don't think it's going to be easy or quick.
However, with the support from all the stakeholders, with our joint work, I think everything's possible. Just to try to imagine the legal aid's scope, let me quickly tell you a bit about it. Over the last 2 years, with the primary legal aid, we have delivered more than 1 million consultations. Over 600,000 requests were received by the hotline. Online consultations scored 107,000. Of course, we normally consult people in criminal proceedings and administrative cases. To get a consultation today, you can see from the figures, one can call the hotline. That's the easiest way to do it. Or they can apply online or come in person to a legal aid center. Remote services are preferred by people because it is faster to get the support, not to waste a lot of time and resources to travel to the center. So how do we disseminate information and train people? We practice various things. City lights, We inform people in the streets. We have ads, ad boards in the underground, in the subway. We publish a lot of information online. Last year alone, with the support of Council of Europe's project, we even placed posters in trains, on railway. The number of calls per day increased dramatically to the hotline, I mean. But we can therefore deliver much more proficient consultation, understanding issues that our client faced, not just quoting by quoting legislation, but by awareness raising and explanations. With this annual growth of the calls and interactions with people, we mean that we cover and reach out to more people. Again, coming back to the question, how to promote mediation properly? I think we need to be talking primarily about the most convenient tools, among which is, of course, in-person communication with people, to understand the person's problem that he or she came to us with. There is a fantastic tool, which is the word of mouth, when people just share this information on the advantages to other people. And we run a lot of awareness-raising campaigns to spread information about mediation. But normally the performance increases by 2 or 3%. Sometimes it seems to be very insignificant. Maybe one might say that this is not a very good investment to disseminate information on mediation, but it's not the case. Yesterday, our Prosecutor General posted information that their office are implementing mediation. It is implementing mediation to even support investors. They now have a specific dedicated unit to work with investors. Thank you. I'm going to be ready to answer your questions whenever you have them. Thank you, Oleksandr. Thank you very much for this concise and comprehensive information that you've shared with us over the years of experience. I think experience is something really valuable, that is a real stronghold, because this is an evidence that we've been doing a very good job by engaging as many people as possible to mediation to resolve their problems. Actually, we mediators keep talking about that we get more clients through word of mouth and personal contacts versus social media advertising and other marketing tools. And this is indeed a very sensitive service. Sometimes people do not know about it unless they faced a difficult life circumstance. So at least when people know that something like this exists and works effectively, they can really go to that for mediation in the first place. At the same time, I heard you emphasize the need for more training for those in the first line of contact with people in conflict. They need to know what mediation is and what it's not, so that people can figure out whether it is worth being referred to for mediation. And this is substantial work that you've been doing. Of course, there must be tailor-made approaches, but you keep insisting on the need to train more people, those that deliver services primarily, those people that could advise referring people to mediation. We've had a number of successful cases. There are great stories that can be shared. There are very emotional stories, by the way, and we have to talk about that more. It's going to produce much greater effect than anything else. You were also making an emphasis that the legal aid practitioners is much broader than just those people working at the legal aid centers, which are more than 100. We can spread information about mediation in many more, with many more entities. And it really has to be holistic and comprehensive. We need to speak the same language, whether it is about social services, community-based services, or government agencies. So this is going to create this cohesive tissue altogether. I want to thank you so much. Thank you for everything that you've been doing, and thank you for your intervention. And please stay with us, because I hope our audience will have more questions to you. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Yue-En Chong. Please tell us about how mediation ecosystem has been evolving in Singapore, how you have been working with vulnerable groups. We're so interested in listening to you, Yue-En.
Thank you, Kateryna. Thank you for this opportunity to share on Singapore. I'm going to be presenting about the Singapore ecosystem. But I think one thing about Singapore is that Singapore, different sectors of private as well as government, work very closely together in order to promote mediations. The common thing we say in Singapore is that there is more mediators who've been trained than mediating cases available. So I think the whole mediation training program in Singapore has been very good. I'm going to give a little bit of history of mediation in Singapore to know where we have come from. Okay, so mediation actually is very much part of our cultural roots, where we used to have village elders to mediate cases in villages. But with Singapore being a modernized city, back in 1990, we actually had the courts, the Supreme Court, the highest court of land, to actually promote mediation. So our former Chief Justice Yong Pang Hao actually stressed on mediation being a non-confrontational and less costly process in settling problems in terms of time and money. Actually, this is very important because without the support of the government, as well as with the support of the courts, mediation would not have managed to take off in Singapore. And where it developed since then is we have laws concerning mediation, like the Mediation Act in 2017, followed by Singapore spearheading the Singapore Convention on Mediation, which is the UN Convention itself. So going very quickly to how does our mediation ecosystem work, let me give you an example of what actually happens in a community mediation case. So a community mediation case where there is a neighbor who might be actually not very interested in talking about, I'm not very interested in being very affected by by the neighbor upstairs. It comes as a division under the Ministry of Law. So that is government. So the government's mediation, Singapore Community Mediation Centre, then sets up this mediation for between neighbors in disputes, and the volunteer mediators are from the private sector. The community leaders or lawyers, they could be grassroots leaders, they could be people who are very social workers, basically someone who's volunteered. And after that, what happens is that if there are further issues with this, then they would then be referred back to the courts under Community Dispute Resolution Tribunal to actually then adjudicate on these disputes. And one way to allow access for justice is that the price that they pay for this is just $5 Singapore dollars. So I mean, it's quite nominal, by purpose to encourage people to attend mediation. Another example is family mediation. So in Singapore, mediation is actually mandatory. It's compulsory for families who are going through divorce, but they have one child under the age of 21 years old. Now, the thing over here is that we split it into two ways for mediation in courts. First of all, that if the court themselves does the mediation, it will be the judges themselves, the family court judges that do mediation, and it will be for free. And the second thing is that if the value of the assets is more than 2 million Singapore dollars, which would roughly translate to about 1.8 million USD, then the court will order private mediators who are lawyers to actually do these mediations. In the sense that there's quite a lot of support from the courts to pass cases down to the mediators, while the more vulnerable groups actually get the mediation done by the judges. So in this way, you can see there's again a collaboration between the judiciary, the courts, as well as the private mediators in Singapore. So when we talk about vulnerable groups, who are the vulnerable groups we see? I mean, it's very interesting to hear about children abroad, Ukrainian children abroad who needs to be brought back to Ukraine. But I think I've also been hearing things that are quite similar, like domestic violence. I also hear about the Istanbul Convention, which I have never heard about before, and how is there's a ban on mediation for domestic abuse cases. Now, I think in Singapore is not part of the Istanbul Convention. And I think it was really set me thinking that if there is legal representation, if there are lawyers there, wouldn't that balance the power between those who are facing domestic abuse, the victims, and the perpetrator itself, if it comes to a divorce situation? I don't know more, but it's an interesting point for me to find out more. But I think it's some simple things like if there is people living with physical disabilities, there must be accommodation taken in order to allow them to attend mediation in court or in private mediation. So in the family justice courts and the other courts in Singapore, there is accommodation where there's sign language for people who are deaf. There are wheelchairs given for those who can't really walk very well. If there are foreigners in Singapore where English is not the first language, then meaning that the proceedings are all in English, we provide translators for them. If there are people living with psychological issues like mental illness or personality disorders, we have this very specific department set up in the Family Justice Court called CAPS, which is the counseling service, where they can provide certain services for the people attending the courts to get them in a place where they might be then ready to mediate if they have to cope with their psychological or mental illness. And finally, about children who are under the age of majority, basically, if they are children in a divorce case, how do we handle it? So I just want to talk about CAPS, which is the Counseling and Psychologist Service. Basically, it's a social science arm in the family court. In order to provide guidance, CAPS is completely free. So what CAPS does is that they do two roles. Number one, they provide a collaborative function with the judges. It's like having social workers, therapists, and counselors in the court together with the judges. They will interview the children, they will talk to parties, and during mediation, the CAP counselor would then speak to the judges and inform the judges about the findings or the recommendation in the case. This is basically looking at not just law itself, but law and social work, law and counseling and therapy, all coming together as an ecosystem in order to bring justice and bring resolution to the families. So this is basically some of the things that they do, and they further refer the parties out to other agencies if, for example, there's a need for further follow-up on addiction or other mental health conditions. So because of this, one thing that CAPS does is they work with other institutions like the Institute of Mental Health, which is the main government psychiatry hospital, the Addiction Management Services, the Agency of Integrated Care. Being that there is mediation, we know is a highly emotional time, but sometimes there's underlying issues that brings forth this emotional reaction. And that is why on the Singapore side, we've recognized for a very long time why psychotherapy, counseling needs to be very much part of this whole way of helping people to come and resolve their issues. Another thing that Singapore has introduced is our concept called therapeutic justice. I put some links there for us to read up a bit more on what is therapeutic justice, but in a nutshell, therapeutic justice basically means that law as a healing tool, as a healing vehicle on how can we bring about healing for the parties that's coming to the court. And then after that, they go out in a better state than they went in. So this is a little bit more about the services, which you all can probably see and read. You're interested to see what else can be started if you're looking to start a psychological service within the courts itself. And also some of the other accommodations. Now, talking about access to justice for vulnerable groups, in Singapore, there's a lot of emphasis on something called mediation advocacy, where lawyers, advocates, are there with parties to allow them to have legal justice. So we have Pro Bono SG, for example, where they give family justice support schemes for spouses for foreigners. Because in Singapore, under our Legal Aid Bureau, only Singaporeans, citizens, as well as permanent residents can qualify for legal aid. So we have like Pro Bono, which is part of the Law Society, that actually provides services for people who fall within the cracks if they need help for legal aid and to represent them in mediation in court. Lawyers will then be appointed with access parties as mediation advocates. Now, on the part on children, I think it's interesting that we actually do include children in mediation if the courts consider them to be matured enough and able to actually contribute to the mediation itself. Now, and those every family that goes through divorce and they do have children under the age of 21, they will be referred to child family specialists. And these child family specialists would then look at the needs of the children to ensure that they have a voice a voice that's independent of their parents, in order to really talk about what they feel in relation to this mediation. So, okay, maybe I went a bit fast, but in conclusion, mediation in Singapore is more than just a mediation service. We are talking about building an ecosystem where there is cooperation between the government, the courts, as well as the private sector. We want no one part can survive without the help of the other part as well. And then to add another layer where we see from the social sciences perspective that mediation has to be also supported towards with counseling and therapy. So even in the private sector, one example I would want to bring up is EMCC, which is Eagles Mediation and Counseling Centre, where I am a panel mediator. One thing I liked about EMCC was very early on, even before the greater inclusion of counseling with the courts, was EMCC used to have the counseling arm, basically referring cases over to the mediation arm. In the mediation arm, if they find that parties might need some more psychological help first, then referring their clients over to the counseling arm. In fact, there have been cases where both a trained counselor who is also a trained mediator, as well as a mediator who might be a lawyer, they sit together as co-mediators addressing parties. And with mediators coming from different sectors, it provides and allows different perspectives to come in. Mediation advocates are available for financial support of vulnerable groups in the form of pro bono legal aid. And I think that over time, one thing that is done very well is because the Singapore government does a lot of statistics in the newspapers. So a lot of information is out. Like for example, 80% of our cases, 8 out of 10 cases, resolve at mediation in terms of family disputes. At least 70% are resolved. And with numbers going out frequently, people are actually confident that the mediation service actually works in Singapore. So I think in this whole sense here, in the sense of the public and private cooperation, I think this is how we do mediation, and we continue to be very interested in expanding and learning about mediation across the world. So okay, thank you for this, and I think that's my presentation.
Дякую, пане Yue-En. Ви були
Thank you so much, Yue-En. You've been really fast, but very concise. But you've nevertheless managed to share a lot of very useful information. We have a bit more time remaining right now for maybe questions, comments, etc. I can hear you've been talking a lot about cooperation between the state and the private sector, about the different coordination mechanisms and focusing on different areas. So this is a really good cohesion. You also talked about volunteers a little bit. I think everyone today has been mentioning volunteers, and it requires also coordination and partnership. I can see a lot of similarities between Ukraine and Singapore. And what I can hear from you, that 80% of cases are family related. And it's not only about the dissolution of marriage when mediation is mandatory, but it sometimes has to do with other conflicts in families, right?
So what I would like to clarify is when we say 80%, it's 80% of all cases, including commercial cases as well. Just that in my sector, we see a lot more cases in the divorce side because of the family justice court that does divorces. But in the statistics that are online, like the Singapore Mediation Centre that see cases across the board, we do 70 to 75% success rate. So in that sense here, mediation has taken off because many lawyers are trained as mediators, and there is no concern about losing the fees at litigation because generally we are looking towards how do we resolve cases and bring harmony and restoration to relationships between parties.
Дякую. Це неймовірно важливий акцент, який ви додали, що співпраця адвокатів і медіаторів може бути
Thank you.
дійсно.
This is a very important point. It's not about competition, and trained attorneys cooperate with mediators. That is very good. And many attorneys have been trained to become mediators, and they advise their clients to use mediation as a tool. Interpretation is also important. but there was a panel yesterday regarding interpretation in mediation. In Ukraine, social services of mediation are free of charge. Legal aid is also free of charge, but you're saying about a small fee, like $5. What was the point of such a small amount, but still you have to pay something? What was the logic behind this?
The logic is called ownership. Because if someone comes to mediation and thinks it's completely free, they may not they do not own the process as a party. But even paying a nominal fee of $5, there's something out of their pocket. It would mean that, yes, I paid something, let me do my best in mediation and try to resolve things. So I think we know, like, for example, when we give free legal advice, people walk away. But when they pay something for consultation, they would end up being more serious and taking things seriously as well. But I would like to also say that in Singapore, there's quite a big, thriving private mediation community. The top mediators in Singapore can earn 15,000 Singapore dollars for one mediation session, which maybe translates to maybe about $11 USD for one mediation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Дякую дуже за ваш акцент. Абсолютно підтримую, бо маю особистий навіть досвід роботи в
I
соціальному.
support this logic indeed. I share it. It's a small investment, but it gives a big impact at the end, so to speak. Now, the law cannot be, panacea. It cannot, take care of all the problems. So we can cooperate with mediation that gives prevention. It's almost like in the medical sphere, you can do preventive measures to improve health. So that's what mediation does in a way too. Thank you. Now I'd like to give the floor to Andrea. Please tell us about your vision of education and access to mediation services from your standpoint.
Thank you so much. I'm just wondering, can you see the slides?
Майже, будь ласка, трошки правіше на екрані. Або треба включити.
Almost. Can you make it full screen?
Yeah.
Can you make it full screen? Because right now it's too small.
Okay, have you full screen now?
Зараз ми бачимо резюме.
No, not yet. No, this is not full screen. It's a presentation mode.
No. Can you see
No. No, it's not full screen.
Технічна підтримка може надати можливість демонструвати ваші слайди.
sorry.
Можете
Apologies,
говорити
everyone.
і показати.
If you need technical support, we have the administrator who could help you. Just let us know if you don't know which button to push
Yeah, no, I have
to have it full screen.
You need to put red button on the top of your screen, share.
Yeah, no, I have that. It's showing that it's telling me you are sharing.
У
No,
пані
no,
Андрея
no,
просто
on your presentation, the red one.
Yes.
top.
so-
Go to the
Okay.
right, and here you could see red button. Yeah, a little bit.
yeah.
Yeah, here.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Мені здається, пані Андрея презентує в режимі доповідача, тому ми бачимо екран режиму.
Andrea, return please to the previous page. At the bottom of the screen, you see a toolbar, and there is a little book. Down.
At the
Sorry.
very bottom, there's a icon of a little book.
A little bit left.
Oh,
At the
I'm so
bottom,
sorry,
at the very bottom, there's a book icon.
Fourth icon. Fourth.
No. Open book icon. Andrea, at the very bottom, there's an icon depicting an open book.
You need to
Open book.
before mic.
Вибачте, чи можу я запропонувати пані Андреа дивитися на власну презентацію, щоб технічна підтримка демонструвала для нас її слайди. Пані Андреа, ви зможете називати той слайд.
What I can do, if there's a, rather than kind of waste time going through that, maybe we can share the slides later and I can just talk to, would that be okay? Because they're really for guidance.
Wait a couple
Я
of minutes, please.
можу запропонувати технічній підтримці показати слайди, і ви будете говорити, який перегортати, да? А ви можете спиратись на презентацію, яка є на вашому комп'ютері, без трансляції в Zoom.
Technical support can handle your slides. You will simply tell them when to go to the next slide, and that will take care of itself.
Oh. So thank you everybody for being so patient with me. I had it all set up this morning, but you know, Murphy's Law, nothing ever goes as planned. And especially following such distinguished speakers to trip over my laces as I go to present. But first of all, thank you everybody for being so welcoming today and for giving me this opportunity to join this forum. I think in this time, in the times we find ourselves, not only is there global, national, family, but also community polarization. And people are really struggling in, you know, what can we do and how can we help those that are really finding themselves in difficult positions. So when I received the invite and I looked at it kind of how to ensure awareness and access to mediation services to vulnerable groups, the first thing I did was, you know, to look at who are those vulnerable groups. So if we go to the next slide, I can talk to that, please. Sorry, can we move to the next slide?
Будь ласка, наступний слайд. Підтримка може надати цю. Дякую.
So our vulnerable groups, so firstly is our low income individuals and families. And again, I suppose many of our speakers have talked about the barrier of cost to provide access to mediation. In Ireland, we have a number of government funded organisations. We have Family Mediation Services, the Legal Aid Board, and we also have a number of voluntary groups that are funded through government grants. So we would have community mediation, Ballymun community mediation, Dublin City mediation. So there would be an element of funding towards mediation, but that doesn't necessarily meet everyone, you know. So one of the things I think we need to do as a global society is how do we make mediation more accessible in a cost-effective way. And other vulnerable groups, migrants, refugees, and ethnic minorities. I suppose one of the projects I've been very involved in over the last number of years is the influx of Ukrainians who are fleeing war in Ukraine, and also people from around different parts of the globe, you know, under the IPA system. And on the onset of war, I remember reaching out and thinking, oh my God, how can we help these people who are coming to our shores? And, you know, understanding trauma and conflict and displacement, you know, I could really see that there was a need, or there was going to be a need for mediation. So I was very lucky to link up, you know, as part of the MII with the Irish Red Cross, and they were very forward thinking and really took time to understand how mediation could help and support refugees who were coming into Ireland, and have put in place a panel of mediators and also interpreters to help with mediation. And, you know, I suppose a piece that Vasyl spoke to earlier on was around training people within these organisations, these service providers. And that's something else they did. So they provided training on mediation skills and also trained a number of their employees as mediators to certified level. So there is a way to, you know, make mediation accessible, but then we need organisations that are willing to take that step. And then we look at people with disability. So how do we make mediation accessible for people with disabilities? So we did speak earlier on, or I think it was Owen that spoke about you know, being mindful of, you know, people needing accessibility. But we also have to be mindful as mediators of people with invisible disabilities. And they might be disabilities that only become apparent as we're in maybe the pre-mediation session or the individual session. And then how do we accommodate that as mediators? How do we make that? So it might be something around, you know, neurodivergence. It might be something around fatigue, fibromyalgia, you know, that mightn't be so apparent when we see them in person. But as the meeting develops, we might become more aware. Older adults, and something that the MII really champions is the use of elder mediation and the use of elder mediators who are specially trained to work with families when decisions have to be made for their loved ones and about what the future holds for them. Children and young people, and we've touched on a lot of these, child inclusive mediation. So I'm a trained child inclusive mediator, but even mediators that are not child inclusively trained, to make sure that every mediation is child focused. And that doesn't just include family. I remember doing a mediation where the service providers, the service users, sorry, were children. And so that mediation, even though it was a workplace mediation, had to be child focused. People experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. And often people who experience homelessness, you know, they become invisible to society. They're no longer seen. And so therefore their voice needs to be brought maybe to the table, and, you know, so as mediators, we have an opportunity to be that voice when there's other services involved. And I think Vasyl actually spoke to that earlier on. And then we look at domestic violence, and something that Natalia spoke to. So how can we use mediation in a way that's safe, where screening has been carried out to make sure that it's appropriate, that it's used as a tool for empowerment, so that difficult conversations can be had in relation to be moving forward, in even if it is in separate lives, and how we keep everybody safe within that conversation. And also to be aware as mediators when it's not suitable, when actually doing the mediation is going to cause more damage. And then really, when I look at vulnerable groups, everybody in conflict is vulnerable. And mediators, I think we need to be aware of that. When somebody comes into us in mediation, they're in conflict. They're probably not the best version of themselves. And they're maybe feeling emotional. They're probably feeling drained, anxious. They might not be sleeping. I mean, the list goes on. And then we're asking them to come into a room, to put their trust in us, and to tell us their story, to tell us their narrative, to tell us what's going on for them. And in that moment, they are vulnerable, and they are a vulnerable individual. And as mediators, I think every person we deal with is a vulnerable person. So sorry, if it's okay to go on to the next slide.
Andrea, request from interpreter, could you slow down, please? We cannot keep up with you.
I can.
Impossible to keep up.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as organizations and as a society and as mediators in general, how do we bring about an awareness and an access to mediation? And I think there's a number of things that we have to look at. Firstly, we have to look at education. We have to, although we are in the world of mediation within our profession, and the language we use and our understanding of mediation is everyday to us. It has become common sense to us. But actually, for so many others within society, mediation is foreign. They don't understand it. They come into the process afraid and unsure of what that means. And so through education, whether that's through promotion from our organizations, promotion from our governments, we can allow a system where mediation becomes a norm, where it is acceptable, where it is the first place we go when conflict arrives. And by instilling that from a very early stage through our school systems, it eventually ripples out into different parts of society. And for the generations that come after us, mediation becomes the common sense for everybody, not just mediators and people within our sphere. Funding is also another way. So really pushing for funding from our governments, from EU, from, you know, wherever else we can get it. And really, I suppose, being able to show the value in mediation. And I think with showing the value of mediation, we need to change how we speak about it. We need to talk about the difference it's making rather than the process. And I think if we talk about what it achieves rather than the process, maybe then we might allow it to be more open to funding that is available. And then I suppose support. So, you know, access to mediation, for many, support is needed in order to be part of a mediation process. And that's if there is maybe a cognitive issue, if there is a disability, if we have children involved, if we have domestic violence, if there's a financial support needed. So to bring awareness and access to mediation, support is another need. Legislation, ethics and training. So as regards organisations, as in the Mediators Institute of Ireland, we provide training and we, you know, we work on making sure that our mediators have the best training, that they are doing CPD, that they are continuously upskilling, that they have a code of ethics that which they have to adhere to. And in that way, that provides a protection to those vulnerable people that come into the room looking for us to help them and assist them. And then we have legislation. So if we look at from a top-down approach, how can we build awareness and access to mediation? And that's through our legislation. And in our legislation, we have, in Ireland, we have the Mediation Act 2018. And that was, although it's been enacted and it is something we're governed by, there is still parts of it that have yet to, I suppose, come to fruition. And one part of that is our Mediation Council. And there is a huge amount of work going on at the moment from different organisations and the Department of Justice to try and bring together and fund this council, where mediators will be able to be registered and mediation practices will be regulated from a government level. And then I suppose I touched on language already. And when I talk about language, it's the language of mediation. So we talk about mediated agreements. We talk about mediation settlement agreements. We talk about caucus. We talk about mutualizations. We talk about reframing. But if we talk about calmness, you know, how to stop walking on eggshells in your house, how to have a good conversation with your teenager, how to become friends with your work employee, how to be productive with your work employee, how to collaborate, how to build a better community. And I think if we shift the language to what mediation can achieve, there will be more of a, I suppose, a hook for people to grab onto. And so I think that we've a bit of work together, and that's why a forum like this is so beneficial, because we're bringing minds from all around the world together. So if it's okay, can I ask to go to the next slide? Okay, so this is based on a piece of work by my good friend and mentor, Mr. Ken Cloak, who I'm sure everybody knows. And this was part of the introduction to his book in The Magic of Mediation. And it's around how do we embed mediation into the fabric of everyday life. So first of all, we mediate every...
Вибачте, Андреа, да, це м'яке нагадування про завершення регламенту. Буквально ще пару хвилиночок, будь ласка.
Needlessly damaging and costing. Make conflict resolution skills services available, affordable, abundant. So in other words, basically, I'm going to shortcut this and say that mediation should be like a Wi-Fi signal. It should be in our homes, it should be in our schools, it should be in our coffee shops, it should be in our government buildings, and it should be in our colleges. So really it's all about working towards making mediation the Wi-Fi signal that follows us around. So thank you all. Apologies for the wobble at the start, which caused me to talk too fast for the poor interpreters, so I apologize.
Дякую, пані Андрея. Дякую за ваше
Thank you so much,
терпіння.
Andrea. Thank you for your patience. You added a lot of flavor to this panel discussion. I want to thank this for paying special attention to the unknown that sometimes is scary. So whenever we talk about mediation and try to explain things, if the rhetoric is right, if the language is sensitive enough, if there is enough respect, then people feel the care. And then people have great experience, they're willing to share. And since you start raising awareness from schools, this is our big hope. I mean, it really resonates with what I'm thinking about it. We are going to have another panel discussion on how to work with young people, including in secondary schools and higher educational institutions. So thanks to all the participants for your participation. I can see there is 11:42 Kiev time. We have just a couple of questions. I'm going to put them all together and voice them by myself. So here's something I wanted to say. People speak about presentation. They ask if the presentations are available. Well, if you follow the link, you can find all the material slides for the forum from all the participants in both English and Ukrainian. So please try to take care of that yourself. And there was a question to Mr. Chong. And I think it's probably a good question for every panelist. And the question is, from your own experience, what are the strategies that have shown to be the most efficient in engaging families, especially from low-income families, to be attracted by mediation? What's the strategy that works best? If every speaker could give just a couple of sentences on that. Andrea, I can see yourself, maybe you could answer that one.
I think we have to introduce it to them. I think that's the problem. I think they don't know it's available. So I think it's about promoting, advertising, and letting them know it's available, not just for couples who are divorcing.
Просто підтримувати комунікацію.
Yeah, just keep communicating with people. That's true. What can you tell us, Mr. Chong? What's the best strategy that has worked in Singapore so far?
Well, I gave my answer in the chat box, but what basically I'm saying is that it's a culture of mediation. So basically, when everybody who is working with low-income groups is aware of mediation and the effectiveness of it, even among the low-income group, everyone has a phone, everyone has WhatsApp. They will tell and talk among each other whether mediation is successful. So I think just keep doing mediation, keep on getting the successes, and naturally they will tell their friends and their families and their neighbors, and we will see that even those from the low-income background would trust the process because it works.
Дякую.
Thank you so much. Since we have no time remaining, I'd like to sum up everything that's been said today. Whenever anyone's willing to ask questions to our speakers, you can type them in writing in the chat. What we've discussed today, we were discussing various strata of people, and they're sometimes very vulnerable, that requires our intervention and support. And sometimes they can resolve their conflicts through mediation, and we want to encourage that, because this is going to help them recover. This is something that reinforces people in very difficult life circumstances, which sometimes law cannot resolve, however important it can be. It is also important, crucial, to build ecosystems and coordinate efforts by engaging various actors. And we said that this is both tailor-made approach, individual approach. We're talking about investment, but it is important. At least the least investment, like our Singaporean colleague has said, that small investment works because that brings more responsibility. We were talking about various geographical aspects. Field-wise, mediators can come from different backgrounds. We were talking about financial issues and budgeting from national or local budgets. And this co-funding is also one of the tools. We were talking about the language and translation matters, and language not only in translation terms, but also in rhetoric, like trauma-sensitive, conflict-sensitive language to be used. We're talking about the legislative framework as well as one of the ways to provide greater access to mediation. Also, we discussed the possibility to engage other professionals like lawyers, therapists, psychologists, who can deliver their services during mediation on a more professional basis. We're talking about disseminating positive practices in best cases, or best practices in successful cases, word of mouth, that really works. And we were talking on making an emphasis not on mediation as process, but as the contribution and added value for the parties. We alluded to the importance of ethics, kindness, informality, and high qualification of mediation professionals. And of course, training and education. That's important. We need to find this right balance between how to communicate this information on behalf of the state through national channels, how to do that in various other scenarios. Again, talent, skills of those professionals are crucial because they're the first in the line to get in touch with a client. And therefore, mediation can be referred to, can be recommended, and that's a very simple way to do it. I want to thank all our panelists this morning for your valuable contributions. We're going to have the recording available, and let's continue to think about how to continue broadening the access to mediation, how to build awareness, and only through cooperation of all of us, we can help develop this system. Thanks very much, everyone, for your contributions, and back to Louisa.